All right. Hello, everybody. Episode 288 of the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing just great. Just a news flash for everybody. Justin Haskins has been fired permanently from the podcast. I would also note it's April 1st.
And Isaac was also fired from the
podcast.
Nate Myers,
how's it going?
Development coordinator at the Heartland Institute. I got it.
You did it. I'm proud of you.
Only took 3 weeks. That's a new record right there.
Third time's a charm. It's all good.
So we are going to be talking about COVID passports, maybe the infrastructure bill, assuming that you guys don't get really carried away with the COVID passports, which is not a guarantee. But before we get into any of that, Jim, you and I, and I'm not sure about Nate, but you and I are big fans of the show The Office, right?
Yes. I love it.
Okay, great. All right. So recently there's a news article going around, and I think this is kind of tied into this like concept that there's just this rash of anti-Asian hate going on. But there's an article going around that one of the episodes, the Benihana Christmas episode, is anti-Asian, presents anti-Asian stereotypes, and the actress that was in it seemingly regrets ever being in that because she realizes now that she was the butt of the joke, not Michael Scott or anything like that. But it's just like, you know, we talk about cancel culture all the time and all this crazy stuff and how people are offended by everything and all of that. And like, not only is it applied to stuff that's being produced today, but it's being applied to things that were produced 14 years ago. Pretty sure that episode is over a decade old and it's being dragged up again. And, probably it'll be censored or something. Maybe it'll have some type of trigger warning at the beginning of it when you watch it on NBC Peacock or something like that. But it made me think of, yeah, exactly. There you go. It made me think of how, so it gave me a really good idea for a podcast. Okay. So maybe in between us doing In the Tank every Friday, we should do a show called #CancelEverything. And for each episode, we just randomly pick a TV show or a movie just throughout time, any day, any year that it came out, and we go through and explain why it should be canceled. Obviously, it'll be all tongue-in-cheek, but like the goal of the podcast would be to show that everything is offensive and could be canceled theoretically. What do you think?
I'll raise you one better, Donnie. We should pick exclusively super progressive shows and movies and dissect them in that manner to prove the point that even your most holy entertainment that is, Hollywood approved can be dissected from a SJW point of view.
Exactly.
And by the standards of today's cancel culture, if there was one transgression ever in the entire series, that's it. All of it is canceled, because if you say one thing wrong on Twitter, or if somebody takes the wrong idea from what you may have said on Twitter, your entire life is canceled. So that has to happen for all of our pop culture too, which means we're pretty much left with nothing. I would say books, but they're burning books now too. So, there's nothing safe anymore. But on that Office, oh my God, The Office is great. And obviously we've said this 100 times. It can't be made today. Everybody knows that.
Sure.
But the Benihana Christmas special, every time I would binge watch The Office, now it's off of Netflix, and I'm not getting, what is it on now? Paramount or Peacock. Yeah, I'm not getting that. That's a garbage. But yeah, The Office is one of those shows on Netflix that you would put it on when there was like nothing else on, like you couldn't think of something else to watch. You're scrolling through. It's like, oh, well, let's just watch The Office again. And you'll pick up and binge watch. I would almost inevitably skip over the Benihana Christmas episode, because it was 2 parts. So it was 2 parts of cringe. And the idea that Michael Scott, that's the thing about The Office. Michael Scott is the butt of the jokes.
Yes,
he is the time. All the time. The entire purpose of The Office, the entire theme is that Michael Scott is such an idiot, such a dope, so insensitive that he is embarrassing himself. Literally every time he takes a breath, he's embarrassing himself. But one of the funniest moments of Benihana is when, the joke of that is that they take two waitresses from Benihana come back to the office for the office Christmas party, and Michael Scott had just broken up with his girlfriend, and so he wanted a rebound, and so he brings these two waitresses home, and he inappropriately gives one of them his bicycle, and it's like the whole thing is cringe city.
Yeah,
right?
He's like in love with her. He thinks he's in love with her.
He thinks he's in love with her. But to me, the funniest joke is when they show her there, and she has a black mark on her arm.
Right.
Because part of the joke was that Michael Scott couldn't tell them apart. Now, everybody watching, of course, could tell them apart, but he couldn't. That was the joke. He is such a clueless, and it was a joke about racism, passive racism, and he put a mark on her arm so he'd know which one was which. Yeah,
and not only that, but like the idea that if he's so in love with this girl, but he can't tell it apart from another person, like it's to highlight that joke of like he's on the rebound and he's just falling for the next person that gives him any attention. But no, we got to cancel this. This is outrage, trending on Twitter type of stuff here, and it's just like it. And I think, like, I've mentioned this on a previous podcast before, that, like, maybe the way to combat this is to just push it even more towards absurdity. And that's why I think that this podcast, hashtag cancel everything. If anyone else wants to run with this idea, have at it. Just send me a link to it when it's actually posted. But, like, I want to just have, like, each episode, we just have a big fishbowl with little pieces of paper. And we rummage our hands through it and pull one out and be like, oh, Rocky. Let's talk about how Rocky should be canceled. Just like anything. Because we can find something.
The original Star Wars should be canceled. When they go to the cantina, the bartender says, "We don't serve your kind here." Speaking of droids, well, that's really problematic. So that's gone.
No, we'll just have to have a new digital version where that guy's wearing the equivalent of a MAGA hat, so that it could be some allusion to, him being some Trumpian or something like that.
Oh boy,
that's how you can scapegoat everything. But yeah, so I don't know. Every week there's going to be a story like this about something in your past that's just not cool. Actually, speaking of that, we had gotten a message from a mutual friend of ours, I'll say, that said season 2 episode of the original Muppet Show on Disney Plus has a trigger warning at the beginning because Steve Martin speaks fake Chinese at one point. Meanwhile, the Swedish chef literally speaks gibberish Swedish every episode, and that's fine. This is the world we're living in now, everybody.
This just has to stop. I mean, just lighten up, people. I mean, for crying out loud, not every single thing in life is supposed to be taken this seriously. It's exhausting, man. It's exhausting. I can't take it anymore.
There should be a trigger warning behind every single video on Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus that says, warning, this video was made, or this TV show or movie was made before 2020. That should just be like a blanket cover everything.
Or just say this program was not made yesterday.
right.
That's basically where we're at, or 12 hours ago. But we'll go with yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, look, life doesn't come with bubble. I'm just gonna say life doesn't come with bubble wrap, guys. You're gonna have to learn to deal with that. That's just life.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for them to come for Rush Hour at this point, which is one of my all-time favorite movie series. But I mean, it doesn't get much more un-PC than Rush Hour. You have terminology like Blasian mixed into that movie. You have lots of what would probably be considered nowadays inconsiderate stereotypes of Asian people, and more specifically Chinese people. Lots of politically incorrect jokes. Unfortunately, I feel like that movie's time has come, and it's long overdue in the eyes of the progressive left.
Well, the thing is, the majority of people are not offended by this, and I would imagine if you did a poll that the majority of Asian people do not consider the Benihana episode of The Office some kind of hate crime. I mean,
they probably don't freaking care.
Yeah, they don't care. I mean, nobody cares. That's the thing about. I don't want to get into cultural Marxism, but I guess I'll get a little bit into cultural Marxism. But it is a very small minority of leftist activists that are driving the entire culture right now. That the people don't care. We never signed up for this stuff. Nobody, 90% or even 50% of America did not, take classes in gender studies. And oppression and all of that in college. The majority of people just live their life and understand that a joke is a joke, and that if they're offended, there are gradations of offense, but if they're offended, there are things they can do about it. One of the most important things to do is to change the channel, turn it off, don't watch it, because if people don't watch it, then it will fail.
Well, and
but it's a very small number of very radical leftists who are driving everything in our culture, from Hollywood to our schools, colleges, media, everything.
Well, and I think it's important to point out, especially with, like you said, this very tiny minority driving the majority of the culture in the country, is that I don't even think I would be shocked if even a small portion of, whatever category of people we're talking about are actually offended by something. I think it's more so that there's a tiny minority that's genuinely offended, and wrongly so. But the vast majority of the people in the United States have been programmed socially to the point where if they see something that's un-PC or non-PC, they're not offended, but they have been trained to understand that is going to be offensive to someone, and they react just the same way as if they were actually offended. So it's not really that anyone or the majority of people are taking offense, but they've been trained to respond accordingly as if they were offended.
Yeah, there's like the big government kind of concept of like, if it saves one life. Now that's morphed into like, if it prevents one person from being offended, then we should do it.
Yep.
Well, being sensitive about offense or offending people is now the coin of the realm. It's virtue signaling. It's part of the virtue signaling coinage that you can carry with you. You may not even actually, you may not actually, you may not actually be offended. You actually may not think this is offensive, but if it has the potential to offend someone, you should say that this is offensive. That way you're out in front. We talk about social credit scores. When there's full social credit scoring going on in the United States, being pre-offended is going to probably get you double points.
Yep.
Oh yeah. So again, hashtag cancel everything. New podcast idea. Feel free to steal it. I think
this podcast is canceled now. This podcast is probably canceled.
Well, that's my goal. That's been our goal.
That'll be episode 1.
Andy says silence is violence, gents, but also speech is violence. So I guess we're just living in a very violent world here.
Everything's violence.
Screwed.
All right, let's get to our topic at hand here. So vaccine passports, another kind of question of the day type of thing that I was thinking about is just like, why is it that we were seemingly nearing the end of the tunnel? We see the light at the end of the tunnel with all this COVID stuff. We see the green shoots. There is vaccines. Certain counties in Illinois that whatever is like over 30% vaccinated. So it's like we're getting close to the end of this, yet the insanity is increasing. I don't understand that. And one of the ways that this is kind of rearing its ugly head is this concept of vaccine passports. So here at the Heartland Institute, in healthcare news, our Anne-Marie Schreiber, who's actually been on this podcast before, she's actually covered this vaccine passports thing long before I even heard about it. And I feel like when she was talking about it, I was like, oh, this is kind of like a theoretical thing. Like, it's probably not going to materialize, but here we are. So it's actually happening. So we're going to start off with this article from the USA Today. The headline is New York launches nation's first vaccine passports. Others are working on similar ideas, but many details must be worked out. Geez, that's a long headline. So it starts off saying, starting Friday, New Yorkers will be able to pull up a code on their cell phone or a printout to prove that they've been vaccinated against COVID-19 or recently tested negative for the virus that causes it. The first in the nation certification, called the Excelsior Pass, will be useful first at large-scale venues like Madison Square Garden, but next week it will be accepted at dozens of events, arts and entertainment venues statewide. It already lets people increase the size of their wedding party or other catered events. The app, championed by Governor Andrew Cuomo to support the recovery of industries most affected by the pandemic, is funded by the state and available free to businesses and anyone with vaccination records or test results in New York. As they would with an airline boarding pass, people will be able to prove their health status with a QR code or quick response machine readable label. They'll need to download the Excelsior Pass app, enter their name, date and birth, zip code, and answer a few personal questions to confirm their identity. The data will come from the state's vaccine registry and will be linked to testing data from a number of pre-approved testing companies. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like starting now in New York, you can download this app and put in your information. It creates a little QR code that when you go to, let's say, a sporting event at Madison Square Garden, you go up to the guy at the front door, and when you give him your ticket, you also show him this. He scans it. You come up green. You can go inside. So, Jim. I'll let you have first crack at this. We'll talk about kind of the other iterations that are going on throughout the country, or potentially will go on around the country. But as of now, it seems like this program is centered in New York. What say you?
Well, my energy level is a little low, but it's not going to be that long before it gets pretty high. In fact, I'm pretty hot about this issue, as Donald knows. He came into my office, and I pretty much screamed about it yesterday. So you could say I have a fever on this topic. But first of all, the whole concept of vaccine passports is dumb. President James Taylor of the Heartland Institute, he texted this to me this morning, and he's completely right. He said, if you have the vaccine, then you don't have to worry about whether anybody else has had one or not, because you're immune, right? And you're also not supposed to give it to anybody else. So even if you don't get the vaccine, you're not imperiling anybody else, because everybody else around you is going to have the vaccine, right? So that's the whole point of it, is that you protect yourself. And if anybody else has it, it doesn't affect you. It's fine. So the whole idea of a vaccine passport is stupid. But this is a very, very dangerous road. I mean, if you don't think that having to show your papers or an app to live a normal life is at heart un-American and a huge violation of your liberty, I frankly don't even know what to tell you. I mean, the inability to move. Yeah. I mean, if it is, it's because you don't understand what America is and what being an American means. I mean, the inability to move around freely in public areas, unless you prove that you are not a big steaming bag of infection, is a hallmark of every totalitarian society of the last century, and now increasingly this one. And on top of that, it is utterly dehumanizing, because you are no longer a person. You are considered a vector for the new variants of COVID, which will always be with us. And finally, we're going to talk about this for a while. This is not about public health. This is an exercise of state control. And even if it's enforced by the private sector, and this is going to be a fantastic public-private partnership where you have no idea where your data is and all of that, but none of this is going to go away once the danger of the crisis has passed. The government does not give this power back. They do not start down this road and then turn around. You have to take a stand right here. No vaccine passports, period.
Agreed.
Nate, when you hear about the government in New York actually being the one that's kind of pushing this thing, what's your reaction to this?
Well, I mean, I would kind of just follow up with what Jim was saying. I mean, we've seen this trend throughout the entire pandemic. First, it was with masks. Despite the obvious science of if someone who is, immunocompromised is wearing a mask and I'm not, well, why do I need to wear a mask? Because that person is protected, correct? So I don't need to wear a mask if I don't want to. Well, no, but you have to wear a mask because you're a bigot if you don't and you want grandma to die. Then we saw it with social distancing, and now we're seeing it with vaccine passports. This is not something that's based on science. This is based solely on social conformity. That's it. Because the left, obviously, as we see in multiple topics, they don't really care about science. They wave the banner of science when it's useful, like any other thing, just like they wave the banner of Black Lives Matter when it's convenient. But as soon as Biden's administration is elected into office, suddenly Black Lives Matter can't get a text back. Shocking. But yeah, so it's all about social conformity. It has nothing to do with science, and they are going to pile drive anybody who dissents into the ground. Because this, like I said, it's not about science. It's about making sure you do what you're told. This is how they exercise control over the culture. They spout something as official. They spout something as scientifically backed or morally backed. And if you don't agree with it and you don't comply, then you're a bigot and you're part of the problem.
Yeah, I just don't understand. We say this all the time. When the lockdown started, it was 14 days to flatten the curve, right? Because the biggest threat out there was that our hospital systems were going to be overrun if we spiked too quickly, right? So they wanted to spread that out. Now it's like if one person gets sick, it's too much or something like that, right? And I don't even understand this. this idea that there's no one that wants a vaccine. Surely there's people that are kind of skeptical of it, and I think that kind of stretches across party lines. In fact, like, you know, I'm sure that there's more like hippie naturalists that don't want this vaccine than there are like, you know, religious exemption type things.
And, you know, remember, and, you know, I'm not someone who's an anti-vaxxer by any stretch of the imagination, but for a long time in American history, the anti-vaxxers were by and large from the left. They were from, you know, kind of like the libertarian left. They didn't trust the vaccines, and, you know, they didn't want to have their, right to self-autonomy violated. But, you know, like we've seen in the past 20, 30 years, all of that is pretty much flipped. As soon as they gained the upper hand in culture and government, they could care less.
But like 75%, I just looked up a poll, 75% of people are planning on getting a vaccine. 75%. So herd immunity starts taking effect after 50%. So it's like, why are we going crazy here? Like, what, you know, all of our healthcare workers surely have a vaccine by now. You know, all of the people that are like at most risk either have a vaccine right now or are on the list already to get one shortly. Right. So why are we going crazy? Why are we trying to impose this statewide Excelsior Pass program for like the 25% of people that like don't want to get it? Like, so what? So they get it and they get sick? Then so what? That was their choice. Like, that's fine.
And from the left's point of view, wouldn't they be happy about that? You know, if I'm just some dumb Neanderthal,
Scarborough for sure.
Yeah, some bigot Neanderthal, Trumpians, racist,
the biggest caricature of
right. Wouldn't your dream be for me to catch COVID and die? Like, isn't that kind of like, wouldn't that be great for you? The one less Trump supporter lying around.
It's literally the wishes of some people on Twitter, surely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest concern that's out there from people on the kind of the libertarian side of all this is the concept of privacy, right? So as I mentioned, you have to put in all the data, your name and birth date, and, you know, your medical data and some other personal information, whatever that would be. So Cody Anderson's got a pretty good quote here. He is the chair of the Libertarian Party of New York. He says that the Excelsior Pass is not benign. Not only does the Excelsior app entrust the government with HIPAA-privileged health information, it creates a surveillance state by recording protected health information, tracking individual locations, and correlating gatherings in real time. It requires businesses like concert and sports venues to either join the surveillance regime or remain closed. That's not optional participation. That's force, and will only worsen the economic and psychological damage already inflicted upon New York State by Governor Cuomo. So there's a couple of interesting things in there. So one is the privacy aspect. So they talk about when you read just like the New York Times or Washington Post articles talking about this Excelsior app, they always try to make you like assured that your privacy is taken into account, right? It's all put on the blockchain. It's all anonymous. No one could hack this and look at your information, but it's just like, this is all granted to these health officials anyways. So it doesn't matter if it's hacked, you know, they can look at it.
This is coming from the same government that regularly gets hacked by the Chinese and Russians. So forgive me for being kind of skeptical about your security parameters on this.
And the other thing that they always try to talk about is that it's voluntary. If you don't want to participate in this, you don't have to. Now, of course, that means you can't go to sporting events or, you know, clubs or, you know, some restaurants or whoever wants to participate in this. But yeah, he mentions here that there are strings attached to businesses, that if businesses are being told that they're not going to be able to open to fuller capacity unless they participate in this.
Right.
That's not voluntary.
Yeah, this is increasingly the typical mantra that we get from the left nowadays. Oh, we're not, you know, this isn't government mandated, you know, this is completely voluntary, but we're also forcing businesses to do what we want. And it's increasingly, and I hate using this word because it's so overused and it's so mischaracterized nowadays, but it's increasingly kind of a fascist approach to how they want to conduct their politics. It's a marriage of the state and corporations and businesses and in the economy. It's not voluntary by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, that's another thing I don't get about all of this. And it kind of comes up with like gun confiscation conversations where it's just like, you guys were just talking about how fascist the United States government was. And now you want them to take your guns. Like, you know, we're only like a few months removed from literally Hitler being president, and you want them to be in control of all of your health records and being able to dictate what stores and stuff you can go into.
Right.
The disconnect is so like alarming to me, but yeah, that's just hypocrisy.
Well, a wise person I read online recently said, I can't remember the name, I apologize, but he had said that take the before implementing an especially radical or change or transformational change policy for the government, imagine having those powers wielded by the politician you hate the most.
Right.
And so imagine these. We kind of did understand what it was like. You know, the left. You know, we had the Patriot Act power was wielded by Donald Trump. There was lots of government powers that have gone too far that Donald Trump had the power to wield. And I actually think, to his credit, he didn't abuse those powers, and he certainly didn't propose anything remotely like this. But they don't. You have to think that way. I guess they think they're going to be a permanent majority, and that there will never be a meaningful election again, and that they'll always be in control. So if they think that, and they're pushing these policies, I don't know. I'll just keep that in my back pocket. We'll talk about that later. But this is, as a former president once said, what's going on here with the vaccine passport is a fundamental transformation of the United States. And if you don't see it that way, you're really not looking very carefully. We would be transitioning from a free society to a permission society. So you used to be able to be free to go wherever you like, to get on an airplane, to fly to see your mother, to drive across state lines, to attend a baseball game, and do all of these things without asking the government to give you permission to do those things. You could just do them. Now, with a vaccine passport, if you can't get in to a baseball stadium, if you cannot get on an airline, if you can't get out of your state, if you can't go into a restaurant, if you can't just live a normal life without going along with the government's vaccination app program, which has no guarantee of security, which is done in partnership with big tech, which, you know, as proven through the last election, does not play fairly and cannot be trusted with sensitive information. And as Andy pointed out, I'm sorry, as Andy's our producer, as Nate pointed out, having the government involved in this when their own databases are being hacked constantly by China and Russia, this is insane. This is just, on practical terms, it's insane. But this is the transformation of our society from a free one to a permission one. And when you start asking the government permission to live your life, you don't stop. It doesn't stop. You never go back to being free. Well, you might, but it's a very long and dangerous and often deadly road to get there.
Yeah, you know, I think that is actually probably the most important point of all of this, is that transition from a free state to a permission state, where you have to beg for you know, to be able to be allowed to go to these stores or venues or sporting events and all of that. Like, that really can't be understated.
You don't have to beg, you have to comply. You
Sure.
have to comply with whatever the government says. And guess what? What the government says you must do will change, and it will always become more intrusive on your life. And then this app will not just be about the COVID vaccine. Hell, why not the flu? You know, the flu kills a lot of old people. You know, you got to make sure you have your flu shot too before you go anywhere. And then, oh, you know what? All sorts of different crises or emergencies that we need to regulate and fix and solve and crush. So we're going to put those on the app too. And we're also going to be, actually, since you have to check in everywhere you go with this thing, the government and big tech are going to know everywhere you've been,
yeah,
and what your habits are and what your life is. This is such an intrusion. This is utterly un-American. It is unconscionable that we are even having this discussion. Nobody listening to this podcast a year ago, or especially 2 years ago, would have dreamed that we would be having a conversation right now that America is transitioning to a permission society, where they're asking for your papers, where you cannot just go about your normal life. You may not be able to go to work if you don't have your vaccine, your vaccine pass up to date. That could, why wouldn't that come? Because it's just as dangerous, right? You might give it to somebody. The entire concept for this is that if you give the virus to just one person, then it spreads like wildfire all over again, and we're all going to die. We have been conditioned to fear coronavirus in a way that is completely out of sync with its death rate. And it's yes, it's contagious. It's extremely contagious. 80% of all hospitalizations are people that are old and obese. The death rate among people under the age of 30 is statistically 0. And we are locking down our society and transitioning to a permission society over that. That's why this has never been about health. It's always been about control, and our liberty is at stake. You need to resist this, even if you want to do it to just go along and go about your life. This has to be resisted, not for our sake or for your sake, but for the nation's sake, for the history of America's sake. This liberty will not come back. It won't come back. It will be lost forever. Well, you do not turn around from this road. You
Jim,
have to understand that.
Let me interject here, because I feel like something that people on the right do a lot, and rightly so, is point out the problems and the issues with what the greater expansion of government that the left often proposes, and sometimes from the right as well. But I get the feeling that a lot of times we complain and poke holes in what's wrong with what they're proposing, but a lot of times we don't offer up viable solutions or alternatives. So what would you recommend to people who want to actually resist this sort of thing? Simply just mass non-compliance, or is there a better plan that could be proposed to try to combat this, or what do you think?
I think mass non-compliance is certainly on the table. I think what we're seeing already, immediately, Ron DeSantis, the best governor in America right now, immediately after this whole, and I just don't you love the title of this from New York, Excelsior Pass?
I know.
I mean, geez, Louise. But he said, hell, half the population in New York has moved to Florida in the last 10 years. So, there's quite a connection between New York and Florida. But he said, under no circumstances is Florida going to mandate a vaccination pass to do anything in the state. In fact, he urged the legislature to immediately ban the use of a vaccine pass. And so, that's what needs to happen in a lot more states. If 25 states, if 30 states decide that, a vaccine pass is actually banned, that businesses may not require the use of a vaccine pass to get into any public accommodation, that will go a long way to helping this. States do have a lot of power. The federal government is not able to just roll over everybody at once, only if they lie down and take it. So good for Florida, and many, many more states need to do the exact same thing. And that will help give the public some confidence about, what, I have actually more choices now, and I am going to resist, and I am going to decline to do this. I might get my vaccine, but I'm not getting that stupid pass.
Well, and I think also that when people decide to commit civil disobedience, they also need to remind themselves that there may be consequences, and they need to be willing to accept those consequences.
Right.
What I've heard from some friends of mine is that they would like to get the vaccine simply just to get back to normal. They don't necessarily agree with it, but they, under normal circumstances, they would probably pass on getting the vaccine, but they're just so done with all this COVID nonsense that they just want to get back to normal. And I completely understand that sentiment. That's a sentiment that I resonate with, immensely. However, at what cost? At what cost do we get back to normal? At the cost of your personal liberty? Is that really what you want to sacrifice? I mean, Benjamin Franklin is rolling in his grave right now. Ye who gives up a little security, a little liberty for a little security will receive neither in the end. And those words have never rung truer throughout history than right now.
The reason your friends are reluctantly wanting to get a vaccine is because we've all been held hostage for a year. Our mentality has gone from being a free individual to being a hostage, and your mindset it's basically, I'm sorry, I tend to exaggerate maybe on this podcast a little bit, but this is actually a broad societal abuse, mental abuse. We all have hostage mentalities right now, that we'll do anything to be able to go to a baseball game again, with our families. We'll do anything to be able to go out to a club. We'll do anything to be able to just pick any restaurant we want and go sit down. We want to go to Disney World again. We want to go back to our normal lives, and we've had it withheld from us for a year. Right. And so our brains have turned into hostages, and we start thinking like hostages. And Donnie, when you said the beginning of the podcast, like, why does it seem like when there should be lots of good news, where there's light at the end of the tunnel, that suddenly there's another, that the goalposts have been changed again, or that suddenly we have to start thinking about something else horrible, which is basically the destruction of a free society into the transition of a permission society. And it's because that's what a hostage taker does to their hostages. They give them enough hope so that they don't kill themselves and so that they will continue to think that I will get out of here one day. And then once that hope is about 90% good, they pull it back down. And then it's a form of mental torture. That's what's happening right here. As a society, we're being mentally tortured.
Well, not only so they don't kill themselves, but so they don't offer any significant resistance. And I think that's what's most important here is, like you said, they give you just enough hope so that you think there's light coming at the end of the tunnel, and that you don't, rise up and open revolt.
Right. If there was no hope, then you'd have to look for your own way out. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and start thinking by themselves. They start questioning the narrative.
And it's showing that little bit of light that makes you, so when you pull it back again, you'll say, oh, no, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Vaccine passport? Fine. Just please let me out of here. Let me out of here, and I'll do whatever you want. So even if like a month ago you thought vaccine passport was crazy, now that everything's opening up and people starting to feel a little bit of hope, now they're even more conditioned to just do whatever it takes. I don't care what it is. Just I'll do it. Let me out. Let me out. I want to be free. But you know what? You're not going to be free. A vaccine passport does not make you free.
Right.
Well, let me complicate this a little bit, because the Joe Biden administration was asked about this idea of the COVID passport, whether or not they're going to pursue some national version of what's happening in New York. And the press secretary, Nate's crush, said something along the lines of like, no, it's actually going to be
very attractive, objectively speaking.
Very attractive?
Yes.
Very.
Let's not get sidetracked here.
Like a stern teacher.
To each his own.
So she said that the point of view of the administration is that this should be driven by the private sector, right? So obviously that's not necessarily the case in New York, even though they try to call it voluntary. But we are seeing some voluntary actions being taken by different industries across the country, most namely the airline industry. So they apparently, according to one expert, there's already a half a dozen digital health passports already in development by various airlines. The American Airlines is already using an app called Verifly. Lufthansa is expanding their use of Common Pass app to involve some health screening type information.
United is requiring their employees to get vaccinated. It's not optional.
Sure. There's colleges across the country that are developing their own kind of COVID passport type things to ensure the safety of the students on the campus and all of that. So, obviously libertarians, small government advocates are always weary of actions taken by the state, right? Because they don't operate on voluntary means. It's all mandatory mandates. So when you see these private companies like airlines or even colleges or any other industries that are kind of taking on this, do you have the same type of reaction, Jim, or is this a totally different picture?
I think it's a totally different picture. I have a friend actually who works in he works with viruses. He works in infectious diseases, and he thought it was, his idea is that it's not that big a deal. It's like, look, I had to get a yellow fever shot when I went to Africa, and here it is. This is very common. And then people also bring up, again, we're not anti-vax here. We're not. We're pro-choice. Whatever happened to my body, my choice. By the way, that's out the window. It's the state's body and their choice.
It's no longer convenient.
No, it isn't. So there you go. Principles don't, the left having principles. That's funny. So, but then people compare it to, kids have to get vaccinated for the measles or, and certain, communicable diseases, measles, mumps. I don't know what the others are. It's been a long time since I had my childhood shots before going to public school. But, there are some families that opt out from that and they're allowed to do that. But in some states say you have to get the vaccines as a kid to get into school. Again, those are special and specific circumstances. This regime would be basically everything in life that you want to do, you have to have done what the government says first. Literally almost anything you would do outside in a public square. What happens if the grocery stores decide that, we've had people going in grocery stores for the last year with masks on, and that was sufficient to keep everybody safe? What if grocery stores say that you have to show your vaccine pass before you can come in, vaccine passport before you can come in and buy groceries? So it's not even about people going out to eat or going to a ball game. It's about literally, this has the potential to literally affect every single aspect of what used to be considered normal life.
Yep.
That's a big difference from all these other exceptions.
I can easily see big box places like Walmart, for instance. I mean, Walmart has been so militant about their mask mandates that they have greeters stationed not only, in the internal doors that open for you, but externally as well. They greet you at the door just to make sure that you're wearing a mask. I could easily see them doing that with a vaccine passport. They just have, some 85-year-old guy who's semi-retired staying there in his little blue vest, holding a phone to scan your passport. And if you don't have that, sorry, you can't get in.
And this is where the nexus between business and, big business and big government is coming together. So if you think about traditional businesses like a Walmart or an airline, let alone big tech, which will be actually running all of these applications. Businesses like that are regulated by the government. They're always, that's why they have all those lobbyists in DC, so that they can make their business model most advantageous to them and hard for their competitors, but also because the government's always regulating business. So it's not voluntary when the government says that convinces basically all these big businesses to implement a vaccine passport system. It no longer becomes voluntary at that point. And that's where I think you might see some lawsuits where people may
I hope so.
Yeah,
really
lawsuits saying that this is unconstitutional. There's lots of grounds I think you could challenge this, but the idea that if you can't go into Walmart, then go to Target. And if Target does it, then go to that smaller store out, or I guess we're left supporting Jeff Bezos at Amazon if you wanted to get anything, because you don't need a vaccine passport to get to Amazon. Oh my gosh. Unless maybe Amazon too would get in on the game and say, you can't even order for me unless you show proof of your vaccine passport. I mean, that sounds absurd, but that's what's happening here. The government is using the private sector and big business as the enforcement arm to carry out their policy aims. And their policy aim is to make everybody get a vaccine passport. Well, and I think, as you said it before, Nathan, it's a term that begins with F. I believe it rhymes with ashism. It might be fascism. That's what fascism is. It's government being the enforcement arm of the government, or a business being the enforcement arm of the government.
Right. Or perhaps more accurately defined, it's cultural and not only cultural, but also in a sense, governmental Marxism. It's mass compliance. It's collectivism. It's always taking the moral high ground. I mean, it's not going to, and I think I want to remind people that it's easy when you're more so on the right to, kind of jokingly say, oh, those loony people on the left, or, oh, those idiots. This is not lunacy, and this is not idiocracy. This is purposeful. This is premeditated, and this is intelligent. They're doing this on purpose, and there's a strategy behind this. Make no mistake about it. This is not, just them being whimsical about something. They have a clear intended goal, and they will not stop until they accomplish that. And as of late, it seems like the left is much more dedicated to their causes and are willing to go farther than the right is. Yep. And I'm starting to get tired of the cowardice that comes from the right.
Yeah, Nathan, you've mentioned in past episodes that once the government kind of sinks their claws into something, they never let go. The perfect example of that is the income tax started as a 0.5% on the richest Americans.
Right.
Where is that now? And the idea that the Americans were able to kind of stomach a lot of this at the beginning of it, when we were really kind of afraid of what this was. We didn't know what the mortality rate was. Right. We wanted to be really cautious, overly cautious probably, but better safe than sorry type of thing. That was the first couple of months. Now we are north of a year of this, and it's just what do we think? That New York and all of these industries are going to start putting together these COVID passport apps, and then once the pandemic is over, we're just all going to delete it. All of that infrastructure that they're building is just going to be deleted.
Right. Yeah,
no,
all the
it's not.
billions
It's
of
going to be
dollars that they're investing into this. Oh, okay, a couple months from now, once we reach herd immunity, okay, we can just abandon this $1 billion project that we've been working on for months.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, this will metastasize into something else. Jim, you mentioned it before. Yeah, maybe this will be used to prove that you have flu shots in the future. I think that this is probably the start of some type of social credit system. But yeah, I mean, time will tell on all of that. But
yeah, well, what the big tech wants your data. It's like they don't get enough, right, with our use of social media and stuff. And now this takes it up to a whole other level of being able to mine your data. You're the product. There's a reason why big tech, the government says, we'd like a vaccine passport system. Big tech says, oh no, we got it. We'll handle it. It's like, will they be expensive? No, don't worry about it. We got it. Yeah, because they're gonna make a lot more money on the other end. But again, we said this before. We've been saying it this whole podcast is that this is an exercise in state control. It's not about safety. It doesn't matter if the crisis has passed. This will remain. I mean, we are still taking our shoes off when we go through an airline security line, because one guy, Richard Reed, unsuccessfully tried to detonate his sneakers. And now it's 20 years later, and we're still taking our shoes off to go through the security line because one guy failed in an attempt to do that. So that's it doesn't matter what the data says. It doesn't matter, that there might be different ways to stop people from having shoe bombs. No, we're going to continue doing the same stupid, wasteful, annoying process through an airport because of this one thing. So if you think that any of these steps that want to be put in place by our government are going to come back once the crisis has passed and people aren't dying from COVID by we don't have thousands of people dying of COVID every single day in this country. If you think after that we'll be able to pull back on this and go back to normal, you're wrong. It's already hard enough to not to go back to normal without this kind of thing like a vaccine passport. I have friends who are from behind the Iron Curtain. They were born in Eastern Europe that was dominated by the Soviet Union, and they emigrated. Oh gosh, back then they called it defecting because you had to defect. You couldn't just leave. You had to escape the Eastern Bloc back in those days. And they've come to America. They have seen what is going on here even before this idea of a vaccine passport. And they've been extremely worried to borderline horrified that they can't believe that the free country that they were so grateful to have gotten to in the 1980s is now devolving and showing the telltale signs of the oppressive society and regime that they had escaped.
Authoritarianism.
Authoritarianism. This is real. I mean, I know we all feel like we've been held hostage, that we just want to go back to normal life, and we're willing to do almost anything to do it. But you have to put a line. You have to put a line in the sand. You have to put your foot down. Vaccine passports cannot be the new normal in the United States. That is such an un-American thing. We're not a permission-based society. We are supposed to be a free society. And it's either this or I don't know. I don't actually think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to work. But I think the last place, or maybe the first place, you're going to see pressure is going to be with the airline industry. They've already hinted to this right now, because that's you don't have to do an Excelsior pass in New York State to affect the whole country. You can have the airlines decide to do this yourself, and they may not actually do it, in an overt way or in a kind of a heavy-handed way. What they'll do is they'll say, hey, that how you have the TSA program where you get to go through the short line? Well, you don't get your TSA security number renewed until you get the vaccine passport as well. Or here's a line for the TSA Express people who have both the TSA Express and the vaccine passport. Here's another line for the people with the vaccine passport. And then here's the line that goes all the way back there for everybody else who decides to be a free person. So they're going to do things they're going to try to annoy you into complying with the government wishes. And that's something, so you don't have to necessarily boycott everything. But if I have to put up with an hour wait at the airport instead of a 15-minute wait at the airport before I get to my gate, to not comply and to not basically just surrender my liberty and my privacy to the government, so be it. That's a very, very small price to pay.
Amen.
Yeah, like I kind of briefly mentioned, the Biden administration seems like they currently don't have any plans in place for rolling out some type of national version of this. How long before they do? Before they do have plans? Weeks? Months? Because surely they're not going to stay they're not going to keep their beak out of this one.
I think they have plans.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Jen Psaki, they basically said that, they've said we're working with big tech on this. They have they're doing it. They're just not telling us any of the details.
Yeah, no, there's some quote talking about how they have that they'll advise on doing it. I think was the term that was used. They'll advise on it. They won't actually like spearhead this thing. They'll help out though. Something along those lines.
Kind of like like no boots on the ground operations from the Obama years. It's simply an advisory role.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we'll definitely have to keep up on this because it'll be an evolving story surely in the next couple of weeks and months. But we got 10 minutes, and I want to talk about this infrastructure bill. So this seems to be a little bit more imminent every passing week. But it says, so this is a a Washington Post article. White House unveils $2 trillion infrastructure and climate plan, setting up giant battle over the size and cost of the government. So, Andy, the one, if you want to scroll down, there's a nice little chart here that kind of shows, yes, right here, where all of this money is supposedly going to. So, like I said, it's like a $2 trillion bill. Go up a tad there. Infrastructure at home, $650 billion. Transportation infrastructure, $620 billion. Research and development, workforce development and manufacturing, $580 billion. Caretaking economy, $400 billion. It seems like some critics of this bill are saying that this is just like a left-wing wish list of stuff. Jim, I want to go to you because this is obviously being proposed by the Biden administration, but Trump had plans on doing a big infrastructure bill back in his day.
Yeah.
So what's the difference here?
Well, Trump's infrastructure bill, or at least his idea of it, and what he talked about it, was to actually fill potholes, repair bridges, do what an infrastructure bill is supposed to do, which is rebuild and maintain our current infrastructure in this country. This, as you said, Donnie, is a liberal wish list of all sorts of things. It spends actually very little on the sorts of things that people would think an infrastructure bill would spend on, and instead it is. I want to say it's the Green New Deal light or the Green New Deal pared down, but it seems like it's the Green New Deal right now. And what's funny is I saw what Ed Markey and I think AOC and some of the other wacky environmental left whack jobs in Congress said, you know what, this $3 trillion spending isn't enough. We want 10 trillion. And we want it all spent just on climate. So this is a climate bill that pretends it's a transportation or an infrastructure bill, just like the COVID bill was not a COVID bill, but was a big spending list by the Democrats that was pretending to be a COVID bill.
Well, I want to point out.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to point out real quick that, like, when you were looking at this chart, it's easy to be like, oh, I can get behind half of this stuff. Electrical infrastructure, clean drinking water. Sure. I mean, there's a couple of things in here that you could look at and be like, okay, electric vehicles, $174 billion. The affordable and sustainable housing, $213 billion. Like, okay, well, there's a little bit of language being filtered into some of this stuff, but generally speaking, highways and bridges and roads, great. Public transit, okay, yeah, sounds good. Airports, water transit and ports, fantastic. Some of this stuff, I think that if you were just looking at this chart, you would be like, okay, yeah, the infrastructure bill, that sounds great. But this article, the Washington Examiner article that I'll have in the show notes, it really goes through and kind of shows how much Green New Deal stuff is in here. So it's just to read off a couple of them. Biden's plan pledges to invest $174 billion to win the electric vehicle market, including point-of-sale incentives to encourage consumers purchase electric cars. The proposal sets up a grant and incentive programs to fund the build-out of a national electric vehicle charging network. The infrastructure plan will aim to replace 50,000 diesel transit vehicles and electrify 20% of the U.S. school bus fleet, creating a new program at the EPA to do so. Biden's plan will establish an energy efficiency and clean electricity standard to move towards 100% carbon-free power by 2035, a centerpiece of his climate commitment on the campaign trail. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Biden would require the government to buy clean power for all federal buildings. It just keeps going. So it's just like like this article, I think, did a better job of showing that this infrastructure bill is basically, like Jim said, is a Green New Deal with infrastructure just crudely markered onto the front page of it. Nate, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that the coal industry will love this. They're going to see this as an absolute win, considering all of our, electric vehicles and our electric power plants are, more accurately powered by coal. It's just indirectly powered by coal.
Right. Coal-powered cars. Yeah, that's
essentially. Yeah.
So the other big component of this is the price tag, right? $2 trillion. Obviously, there's some people on the one side of the aisle that says, oh, that's crazy expensive. Other people on the other side of the aisle say, no, that's not nearly enough money. We need to pour $5 trillion into this type of thing. So, I would chalk all of this up to modern monetary theory. We just run the printing presses. The debt and deficits don't matter. Just run the printing presses. That's what they'll say. But to Biden's credit, there is actually one little bit, an inkling, a nugget of how you would actually pay for some of this. They said, let's see, on the tax side, Biden's plan includes raising corporate tax rates from 21%, which is actually consistent with our Nordic countries counterparts, up to 28%, increasing the global minimum tax paid from about 13% to 21%, ending federal tax breaks on fossil fuel companies, and ramping up tax enforcement against corporations, amongst other measures. So the big center point of this is the increase of the corporate income tax rate, which, you think of these giant corporations and a big increase from 21% to 28%. You'd think, okay, wow, that's probably going to pay for a pretty substantial portion of this. No, not so much. So the Tax Foundation, they did an analysis on what this would mean. Andy, I didn't send you the link for this, so don't even look. But they've got a couple of different models that kind of shows like how much money would be raised if we did a corporate income tax hike like this. And it would, over 10 years, under the rosiest of estimates, it would get about $500 billion. So about a quarter of this. And that's under the rosy estimates. Under the dynamic model, which kind of takes into a bunch of the unintended consequences of something like that, it only raises $300 billion over 10 years. So it's a far cry from actually being paid for. But Jim, I don't know. I mean, to me, does the argument of this cost too much even work anymore in the era of we have a $30 trillion national debt and we print money like there's no tomorrow?
Yeah, no, I guess it doesn't. I mean, actually, what we're going to do is a double dumb, and it is we're going to just keep printing the money. I think, didn't we? I think I saw a story the other day. I think I shared it with you, Donnie, that we basically just printed $3 trillion in the last several years, just put it out there into the economy. Yeah. And, so why not? So if this costs $3 trillion, it's paper money. I'm sorry, it's digital money anyway. Money is just wired, so is it even real? Is what's happening even real? Because I don't even know if there's any physical dollar bills being cranked off of a press. You certainly couldn't, unless you started printing off, $100 million notes nonstop for weeks on end. You wouldn't be able to. It'd probably take you 2 months to get to $3 trillion. Yeah. But but Biden's going to do two things. He's going to raise corporate income, or he wants to. He wants to raise corporate income taxes and just keep printing money. So you're going to when the economy really took off under Donald Trump, when he cut the corporate income tax to make it in line with all of our competitors in the Western economies around the world. And that's when, boom, we really started to take off. And so, you know what, Biden's just going to pull that plug out. And then also print all of this money. So we're going to have a slower economy plus inflation. We may actually start, if there are any economic consequences that are normal anymore, like they used to be before you kids were born. But there was a economic metric called stagflation, and so we had to invent new words and the misery index. We had to invent new ways to measure all the bad things happening in the economy. We have to go back to those days sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I don't go ahead, Nathan.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just agreeing with Jim.
Yeah, well, I was going to wrap it up here. I mean, the idea that a price tag is too high to kind of derail something like this is just seemingly a thing of the past. Like, how many stimulus packages do we need to recover from this government-imposed recession over COVID to kind of prove that point?
Well, I mean, I think it really just goes to the point that, like, neither people, the vast majority of people on the left and the right, don't care about spending anymore. I mean, let's not forget that, it had the stimulus packages had a majority support from Republicans, not just Democrats. And Trump's proposed stimulus bill was even higher than what the Democrats gave us. So, let's not pretend like this is just coming from the left. This is coming from your moderate Republicans and even some conservatives as well. But it really, to me, kind of feels like they are prepping the public. I mean, the public doesn't give a shit about, the spending anymore. Obviously, we're $30 trillion in debt. But I think they're conditioning people to get ready for some kind of Green New Deal package. Because if, we can tolerate, 2 stimulus packages that are a couple trillion apiece, and now an infrastructure bill that will be $3 trillion. What's, 10 more trillion to spend on the Green New Deal, or 17 trillion.
Yeah, no. Well, they'll pass some Green New Deal thing, and a stimulus will be crudely markered onto the front page of it. Like, they're not above this anymore. Like this. The idea that like a bill is an accurate representation of what's inside, like the name of the bill, that's long gone. We've been past that for a long time.
Right, the Patriot Act.
But we gotta wrap up. So thank you all for tuning in for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every Friday for a new episode. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate, or review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. You can find us on pretty much everything: Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube. Feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions, suggestions for the show, or anything, really. Jim, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and on the corner near my house yelling, "No vaccine passports ever!"
Nate Myers, again, I don't know. Do you have anything to pitch here?
No, I'm a ghost on social media now. I got a personal, but I don't really give it out. But yeah, that's
all right. Fantastic. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.